Just 2 years ago, my life looked like total chaos filled with useless purchases made purely on impulse. I was buying expensive scented candles, yet more throw pillows, and kitchen gadgets I never even planned to take out of the box. When I finally checked my banking app, I saw a terrifying number: $4,000 in monthly expenses with an almost empty savings account. Even though my salary had been quite decent for many years, I had zero assets or savings to show for it. It was at this moment of despair that I stumbled upon an article about an old Japanese budgeting system called Kakeibo. I wasn't just struck by the planning itself, but by how Japanese families pass these financial habits from generation to generation. They build their wealth quietly and steadily, using principles that seem almost too simple compared to today's complex investment advice. I realized that our perception of money is fundamentally different from the way people see it in Japan. In our culture, we are used to celebrating spending. A new car or designer clothes immediately become objects for showing off on social media. In contrast, in Japan, displaying wealth is considered tasteless, while financial restraint is a true value and a reason for respect. There is a concept called tsutsumashi, which means a type of modesty that commands deep social admiration from others. The quieter you live, the more you are admired, whereas here, a quiet life is often mistaken for a sign of poverty or failure. I decided to take a risk and began implementing these principles into my own life, changing one habit at a time over the course of a year. Importantly, I didn't look for a side hustle, and I didn't change my main job. My salary remained exactly the same. I only changed the internal philosophy of how I use my money every single day. The result stunned me. In just 12 months, my savings grew from $800 to $19,000. It was the same apartment and the same income, but an entirely different operating system in my head. In this video, I will tell you about 10 Japanese habits that will help you build real wealth without any unnecessary noise. Each of these methods can be applied right now, regardless of how much you earn. Some tips will seem purely practical, while others will force you to rethink your relationship with things on a much deeper level. The first thing I did following the Kakeibo system's advice was start a simple paper notebook instead of using phone apps. I began recording every single expense, even the smallest ones, from a coffee to groceries throughout the day. The Japanese believe that by writing expenses by hand, we create a physical connection with our money that is lost with contactless payments. This helped me see the real picture of where my funds were actually leaking every single week. The next step was dividing all my expenses into 4 clear categories, just as they do in Japan. The survival category included only things I couldn't live without: rent, utilities, and basic food. Optional expenses included my restaurant visits, new gadgets, and entertainment, which took up the most money. The third category, culture, was for books, learning, and everything that helps a person grow intellectually. And the last category was extra expenses, which included unpredictable events like birthday gifts or car repairs. I realized that previously, my budget consisted almost entirely of optional things that brought no long-term happiness. Every evening, I asked myself 4 questions that are the foundation of the Kakeibo philosophy. The first question: how much money do I actually have at this moment? The second question: how much do I actually want to set aside this month for my future security? The third question was the hardest: how much am I really spending on things I don't need? And the fourth: how can I improve my financial situation in the coming month? This daily ritual took only 5 minutes, but it completely transformed my attention to detail. Instead of feeling guilt over spending, I began to feel a sense of control over my destiny. It turned out I was spending almost $600 a month on subscriptions and services I didn't even use. It was as if I were simply throwing cash into the trash can every morning on my way to work. Realizing these invisible expenses was my first big step toward true wealth. I started implementing the concept of kintsugi into my life, which means valuing the things you already have instead of seeking new ones. I realized that many of my purchases were merely attempts to fill an internal void with ephemeral objects. Instead of buying new shoes, I began to carefully maintain what I already owned, extending its life. I introduced the 30-day rule. If I see something I want to buy, I wait exactly 1 month before paying. This simple rule kills 90% of the impulsive desires that used to empty my wallet in minutes. I found that after 3 days, I often didn't even remember what item I had dreamed of so intensely. I began practicing minimalism, clearing my apartment of unnecessary items that took up my space and energy. Every item in my home now had to be either extremely useful or bring genuine aesthetic joy. I conducted a full audit of my possessions and was shocked by the amount of money frozen in useless junk. I sold some of the items through online platforms, and that first money earned from trash became my first deposit. The Japanese habit of respecting money showed even in the way I began folding the bills in my wallet. I started using separate physical envelopes for each category of spending to visually see the weekly limit. When the money in the hobbies envelope ran out, I simply stopped and waited for the next month without exception. This created clear boundaries that prevented me from going into debt with myself or my future capital. I started cooking at home and taking lunches to the office in beautiful bento boxes. This single change saved me over $300 a month that previously went to quick snacks. My health improved and my energy increased, allowing me to work more efficiently without feeling tired. Small daily steps began to turn into a massive financial snowball that was growing rapidly. For the first time, I felt true freedom from the pressure of advertising and the marketing manipulations of large corporations. I was no longer just a consumer. I was becoming a conscious creator of my financial future. Once I learned to control momentary impulses, it was time to figure out why I felt the need for constant purchases at all. I discovered that most of my desires were social noise. I bought things to match a certain status in the eyes of my colleagues. In Japanese culture, there is a principle that true abundance is when your inner world doesn't depend on the attributes of wealth. I started asking myself before every payment, does this thing make my life better, or is it just filling a shelf? This helped me give up status consumption, which ate up almost a third of my discretionary income every month. Instead of chasing big investments, I focused on the concept of small money that we often ignore. I started a special transparent jar where I would drop all the spare change left in my pockets every evening. Many people think that $2 or $5 won't change anything, but Japanese wisdom says the sea is made of drops. At the end of the first month, there was almost $140 in that jar, money that used to just disappear on trifles. I realized that wealth is not about the amount earned, but about the discipline of keeping what has already come to you. The next step was an audit of my city travel and spending on transportation services. I decided to sell my expensive car, for which I was still paying off a loan, and switch to a reliable used Toyota. This one action alone freed up $450 in monthly loan payments and another $150 in insurance. Now, those $600 were automatically moved to my investment account on the first of every month. I began to see the numbers in my account grow not because of work, but because I stopped being a slave to things. Many friends didn't understand my choice and asked why I was restricting myself when I had a good salary. But I didn't feel restricted. On the contrary, for the first time in years, I felt true peace about my future. Every saved cent or dollar became my little soldiers working for my freedom every day. I learned to enjoy the process of accumulation, turning it into a kind of exciting game with myself. This transition from consumer to steward was the key moment of my big transformation in the first half of the year. As I started seeing the first results, I realized that the hardest part would be the ability to say no to old habits. My friends often invited me to expensive restaurants, and previously I would go just for the company, wasting extra money. I learned to offer alternatives. Instead of dinner at a restaurant, we started going for walks in the park. This was a true test of the strength of my new beliefs, and I found that real friends will always support my journey. To make life easier, I decided to automate the accumulation process as much as possible, so as not to rely on willpower alone. I set up an automatic transfer to my savings account on the day I receive my salary, as if that money didn't exist. The Japanese call this approach pay yourself first, and it became my golden rule for success. When you save first and then live on what's left, you somehow always manage to stay within the budget. I also reviewed all my subscriptions to streaming services and apps that I only use once a month. Canceling everything unnecessary saved me another $80 a month, a trifle that turns into $1,000 over a year. I started buying groceries with a list and only once a week, which stopped the daily chaotic trips to the store. Each trip with a list saved me about $40 a week that used to go toward unnecessary items. Interestingly, I didn't start eating worse. On the contrary, my diet became more balanced, healthy, and high quality. I also implemented the Japanese empty cart rule for online shopping. Add items, but never buy them immediately. I simply deleted most of these carts after a week, realizing those items were just a momentary whim. My apartment began to breathe. There were fewer things in it, but each one had its own true value. I noticed that along with the extra things, the background noise of constant anxiety about the future disappeared from my life. In the 6th month of my experiment, my savings account crossed the $10,000 mark for the first time in my life. It was an incredible feeling of security that no new purchase or designer item could ever provide. I realized I wasn't just collecting money. I was buying myself the right to freely choose how to live my life. One of the most interesting challenges for me was no-spend days, which I began holding twice a week. On these days, my only rule was not to spend a single cent, even on small things like coffee. This turned into a game of sorts where I looked for ways to spend time for absolutely free, discovering new libraries. I started analyzing my emotions at the moments when my hand reached for my wallet or phone to make a purchase. It turned out that most of my spending wasn't a need for things, but an attempt to escape fatigue after work. Instead of treating stress with shopping, I started using the Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. Just half an hour among the trees gave me more joy than any package, and it was absolutely free. I also reviewed my relationship with brands and realized how masterfully marketers manipulate our feelings. I unsubscribed from all advertising newsletters that bombarded my inbox every day with incredible discount offers. When I stopped seeing these temptations, I suddenly found that what I already had was completely sufficient. My discipline began to bear fruit. In the 7th month, I paid off my last consumer loan. It was a feeling of incredible lightness, as if I had finally dropped a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. The amount I used to give to the bank as interest now stayed in my pocket, increasing the speed of accumulation. I started using the weekly cash rule. I would withdraw a certain amount from the ATM and not touch my card. When you see physical bills disappearing from your wallet, you become 10 times more careful with your spending. My spending on eating out was cut by another 50% because I began to value every single bill. I started seeing money not as pieces of paper, but as the time I spent earning it. This realization became the best safeguard against senseless purchases that weren't worth a single minute of my life. By the end of the 8th month, my capital grew to $14,000, and I felt true stability for the first time. I realized that the Kakeibo system isn't about numbers, it's about honesty with oneself and respect. As my savings became stable, I began thinking about how to make them work for my future. I discovered the concept of Mottainai, which means anticipating your future needs even before they arise. Previously, I lived paycheck to paycheck, focusing only on satisfying today's whims, which was a mistake. I began studying investment tools that allow capital to grow on its own thanks to the power of compound interest. It was like planting a garden. You care for the sprouts today so that years later you can have shade. I set a rule. 50% of any extra income goes straight into investments without hesitation. My investment portfolio was simple and clear, which completely aligned with my new philosophy of peace and balance. I stopped following the daily market fluctuations because I knew my strategy was designed for decades. Interestingly, when you have solid capital, the desire to show it off to other people disappears completely. True confidence comes from knowing the numbers in your bank, not from the logos on your clothes. I implemented the habit of an investment tithe, setting aside money even from small gifts or random bonuses. By the end of the 9th month, my investments began to bring in the first dividends, money I didn't have to work for. This was a moment of truth. I realized that every saved dollar is my employee who never sleeps. I began to treat my expenses as capital investments in my own personal freedom and time. The Japanese approach taught me that wealth is something you can afford to calmly give up. My ability to say no to expensive temptations became my superpower, reliably protecting my capital from erosion. Thanks to automation, my capital grew steadily even when I was simply sleeping or traveling around the country. I noticed I became much more productive at work because the fear of a financial crisis no longer paralyzed my mind. My savings account and investments together crossed the $16,000 mark, and that was only the midpoint. I realized that financial literacy isn't math, it's psychology and the ability to wait for true success. In the 10th month of my journey, I began implementing the principle of monozukuri, the pursuit of excellence in things. I realized that previously I bought many cheap items that broke quickly, forcing me to spend money again. Now I would rather buy one expensive but high-quality item that will last for years than 10 cheap knockoffs. This approach, strangely enough, began to save me even more money in the very long-term financial perspective. I also realized that every item in my home required my personal energy for care and cleaning. The fewer things I had, the more mental energy I had to focus on my goals. I started using a visual budgeting technique. Before a big purchase, I would draw it in my notebook. When I saw how a purchase visually ate up part of my golden mountain, the desire to spend often vanished on its own. In the 11th month, I felt that my capital began to create a reliable safety field around me. When the water heater in my apartment broke, it wasn't a disaster or a reason for another loan. I simply opened my emergency situations envelope and paid for the repair without even ruining my mood. This is true freedom, when circumstances no longer have power over your emotions because of money. I noticed I began to feel less envy toward others' successes on social media because I knew the real price of every picture. Most people spend money to impress people they don't even actually like. I opted out of this game and began playing my own, the game of true quiet wealth. My savings now totaled over $17,500, and I looked forward to the end of the year. I began planning my first conscious vacation, where every cent would be set aside in advance without any harm. It's a completely different feeling, vacationing on money you honestly earned rather than borrowed from the future. I realized that discipline isn't a prison. It's the key that opens the door to the life of your dreams. My journey to 19,000 was almost complete, but the most important changes happened in my heart. In the 12th month, I faced the biggest challenge, the holiday season, when everyone around goes crazy for sales. Previously, I spent a fortune on gifts, trying to impress people with a high price rather than my attention. This year, I chose a different path, inspired by the Japanese tradition of giving sincere emotions rather than things. I explained to my loved ones that I was focusing on long-term goals, and many expressed their sincere admiration for me. This helped me realize that true respect is built on your ability to have your own firm position. Instead of spending $1,500 on holiday chaos, I spent only $200, saving the rest. I noticed that my mind became much clearer when I stopped thinking about the opinions of those around me. In Japan, there is an expression, "Quiet water runs deep," and I finally felt its true meaning for myself. My capital was approaching the final goal, adding confidence to every next step of my life. I reviewed my wardrobe and decided to sell a few more designer items that I no longer needed. I immediately sent the $400 received to my account, which was another small victory over the ego. I began to see opportunities where I previously saw only expenses. For example, in self-education and reading. Every new skill I learned made me more valuable in the job market, which meant higher income in the long run. But now I knew, no matter how much I earn in the future, I will never return to the chaos. I implemented an evening gratitude ritual, writing down 3 things I managed to save that day. This helped shift the focus from what I lack to how much I already have. By mid-December, my account showed $18,300, a figure that seemed impossible before. I felt as if I had hacked the code of the system that most people in the world live by. It wasn't magic, it was just consistency, discipline, and a deep respect for my own work. The final step toward my goal of $19,000 was ahead, and I was ready to win. Here it is, the last day of the year, and I'm sitting at that same kitchen table again. I opened my banking app, but this time my heart was filled with absolute peace and pride. Exactly $19,000 in savings, a sum that seemed like a fantasy to me just 12 months ago. I remembered the woman I used to be, confused, surrounded by things she didn't actually need. It turned out I didn't need a bigger salary. I needed a different philosophy of life. Wealth isn't built on the ability to earn millions. It's built on understanding the true value of every resource. Japanese principles have stood the test of time because they are based on self-respect and hard work. Today, my home is not a warehouse for things, but a space for living, where every item has a purpose. I no longer feel pain in my stomach when I open my bills because I know exactly what my budget is. Many people look for magic investment schemes, but the real magic is a notebook, a pen, and your attention. My credit card is now just a tool, not a chain that tied me to my job. Now I have a safety cushion that allows me to choose projects following my heart's sincere calling. I realized that quiet wealth is much more pleasant than luxury that requires constant external confirmation. It was a year of great silence and deep inner work that changed the trajectory of my life forever. I plan to continue this path because the Kakeibo system has become an integral part of my new identity. My savings are now working for me, creating the foundation for a future I didn't even dare to dream of before. I want to tell everyone, you already earn enough to start your journey to freedom today. Don't wait for the new year or a salary increase. Grab a notebook and record your first expense. This is the beginning of your personal financial revolution, leading to quiet but inevitable success. My year ended with the number 19,000, but in reality, it's just beginning because I know the rules.